Your Creative Push, episode 280.
If you're going to improve, you've got to take risks. Nobody ever improves by just sitting there.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Dougie Hoppes. Dougie's a dark fantasy artist living in Hillsborough, North Carolina. During the daytime, he writes software for a neuroscience company, and at night and on weekends, he works on his art business. And he comes on the show today to share his artistic journey, one that started much later than most other people. And he shares how he really settled into his niche, how he really found out what he wanted to do, dark fantasy art, and it took his wife to give him very wise advice to paint what he truly loves instead of what he thought he was supposed to paint. Dougie talks about how he destroys 90% of his work, but he documents it all, and he gives us a glimpse into the way that he evolved as an artist, and he continues to evolve today. He talks about some of his own personal resistances, such as getting past tiredness and taking calculated risks. He shares his style of finding the images or the story after he's already made random marks on the page. And finally, he talks about his Kickstarter and how he is repurposing his art in his ShadowMyths book. Just a super sweet guy, a guy who is so inspired by his art and somebody who is going to inspire you today. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Dougie Hoppes. Dougie, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show. This is great.
Oh, thanks for being here, man. Well, we like to always start on the show by giving my guests the opportunity to kind of share their story, sort of how they got to the point they are, creatively speaking, or in life.
So I'm your usual, teenage kid. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons like in the late 70s. I used to draw from comic books. My Doctor Strange was my favorite comic book. I loved it.
Nice.
And I would just draw all the time. But I come from one of those Asian families where, yes, it is stereotypical, but for the most part, my mom was really happy when I wanted to become a scientist because I like physics. I think in fifth grade, I wanted to be either an astrophysicist or a geologist, one of those things. And she was all happy about that. So, and then of course, my mom was pretty much like, do you have a good job? Yes, Mom. I'm going to work for a nice job. I'm going to get a permanent job so that, I'm not poor or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So I went and studied physics. I got my degree in physics. I still drew. And I remember in college, there was a buddy of mine in college. I used to avoid doing homework by just drawing dragons and stuff like that. And I saw a buddy of mine like 10 years after college in my early 30s. And I saw him, he's like, dude, I still have your drawing. I'm like, what drawing? You know that dragon you drew for me freshman year? I go, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have a frame designed and everything. I love it. I'm like, seriously? I was just doing that to avoid homework, but okay. And, it's after my 30s, I realized, I just like to go back to doing art. I did the software development for years. I'm like, you know what? I liked doing art. So I started doing art as a hobby. Then more and more, I just kept doing it. And then by the time I hit my early 40s, I realized, okay, art's pretty good. It's still a hobby and stuff like that. Until the day my wife's like, you got to stop giving all your work away. I'm like, no, but they love it. Nobody will buy it. It's like, tell them a price. So a friend of mine comes by. She sees one of my watercolor paintings. She's like, how much? I go, $75. She goes, okay. All of a sudden that light clicked on. I'm like, oh, people will give me this will give me money for this. This is pretty amazing. And then I did this small little show. And I remember there's this one lady came in and there was a drawing I did of some angels in pen and ink. She came in and she bought it. And I go home and tell my wife, I'm so excited. I was like, oh my God, somebody bought a piece of work. Somebody I don't know. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest thing. Yeah. When your friends and family buy something, that's one thing. But when somebody you don't physically know at all walks in and goes, oh, $80? Here you go. I'm like, okay, there's something to this. So I got the little bug, about selling my work. I did the art fairs. I did plein air events. I used to do in gallery landscapes in Vermont and all over New England. And then we came down to North Carolina, and my wife's like, I'm sitting there talking to her. I'm like, I am not getting into any of the galleries down here. It's one of the things where there's so many landscape painters, and there's really a lot of good ones. And I consider myself mid tier for the landscape painters. But, I was selling my work, but not gangbusters. And I was telling my wife, going, I cannot get into the galleries in North Carolina. And she's like, well, do something different. I'm like, no, but I love landscape. She's like, no, you don't. I'm like, yeah, I do. No, 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 no. You like landscapes. What do you do between the landscape paintings? I'm like, I draw. I draw. She goes, yeah, you really draw these really weird creatures. You draw all these weird landscapes. Do that. This is your night job, not your day job. So you can take the risk. So I'm like, all right, fine. So I did some skull paintings, and I did some skull paintings and some weird creatures, stuff like that. And I went to my very first Comic-Con when I was 48. I've been to, we did honeymoons in Italy, and we went to all the galleries and everything like that, and I loved them. Comic-Con feelings was just different. I walked into there, I'm like, okay, I love the master paintings and stuff like that, but I loved Comic-Cons. And when I came across, like, there's some really good artists at some of these Comic-Cons, they're just amazing work. And I'm like, I just kept walking around looking at their art going, this is amazing. So I'm like, okay, I got to try it. So I did my first Comic-Con, and I came home, I brought like 10 prints with me. I came home like $800. I'm like, oh my God, I sold out 3/4 of my stuff. I made more money than I did some years being a landscape painter. Oh my God, this is amazing. And then I did another show, and I did like almost 3K in sales. I'm like, okay, there's something here. And so I was getting much more excited. So that was about 2 years ago. And so I've been doing, I do Comic-Cons, and I'm like, my wife's right. This is what I do. I do monsters. I do weird creatures. That's what I have fun doing.
Now, I think that's sagely advice, and props to her for kind of realizing like where your talent, or at least your interest was with like the monster thing, as opposed to just doing kind of, I guess, what you were telling yourself that you should have been doing. Like, did you ever have that consideration before, even subconsciously, where you just kind of pushed it away, saying, oh, this is the thing that I really love, but I need to do this real thing? And
yeah, I did. When I was first, so I did in the beginning, I was doing birds. I pretty much did like drawings I thought people were going to buy. In the beginning, what I did is I did stuff at art fairs that I thought people were going to buy, and they bought some of them. But the problem about it is that there's only a certain amount of people that buy them. There's only a certain amount of bird drawings and stuff like that. Yeah, they liked them and everything like that, but they aren't really, really going to buy them. And I'm like, okay, I know people love landscapes. Landscapes are one of the biggest sellers. People love landscapes. But there's so many people doing landscapes. There's so much competition for it. I was like, fine. How do I do a landscape and stand out from everybody else? And that's the whole point. It's if you've got 10 people doing landscape paintings, you got two choices. You either have to be one so good you can't be ignored. So you have to be somebody like James Gurney or all these really high level people that just are amazing at landscapes and hyper realistic or have the emotional feel, or you have to do something else. So what I did was I'm like, I like spheres. I really do. I like painting the balls. Painting balls. Mm-hmm. I think part of it's easy, and just there's something about the symmetry I really like. So I started adding these abstract shapes and these balls into my landscapes. It's back early on when you're first painting, like, it really wasn't good work. But it's not good work compared to what I do now. But here's the thing. It was the best work I could do at that time, and my customers who bought it were very happy to buy it. Mm-hmm. So as I've grown into an artist, some of these customers still follow me. And, they'll call me like 2 years later going, oh my God, so they like the early works because of the concept, and they like more of the later works because of the additional painting skill that is added with the concept.
Right, exactly. And that's the other thing too about the whole, something that we mention all the time on the show is the fact that, it's your best work at the time. There's like a huge gap, and the importance of looking back at your old work to see that progress that you do make.
Oh, I always look back at my old work. So what I do is I'm one of those people, I get people like I get crapped on for all the time for this. Generally I destroy a work that's about 2 years or more older, unless I really like the piece. But 90% of my work gets destroyed after about a couple of years, because I do somewhere probably around 50 to 100 drawings a year, and probably around 40 to 60 paintings a year. So that means my work is continuously always improving the ones I don't sell. But what I do is I keep sketches, I keep scans of all of my pieces. So two things what that lets me do is, one, I can look back at it, say, okay, if the time's going like, you don't know what you're doing. So you can go look back at it. But the other important part I do is because it tells me if I'm in a rut. So one of the ruts I've discovered lately is I'm looking at my paintings from last year. I'm like, all right, and I'm looking at some of my drawings. I'm like, all right, I got way too many vertical standing people. Got to get out of that rut. So how do I get out of that rut? So, all right, let me go. So now I'm doing a lot more dynamic people at different angles and stuff like that. They're not vertical. They're more cross angle. They're more leaning down, picking up stuff. They're doing more something different. So I also noticed that for a long time, I was doing a lot of extreme close-ups for my creatures near the edge of things. So I'm redoing parts of that. So I'm putting some people more towards the middle. I'm still maintaining some of the stuff I do, but what it does is I'm changing. I look at my old work to keep changing it up so that I don't run into, you're the guy who does only this. Because if you do that, what happens is they may buy one or two of your paintings, but you're done. Because they go, okay, all of your paintings kind of look like that, so I really don't need to get any more. But if I change up all the sceneries and all the, between doing a creature, doing a scenery, doing a bunch of other stuff, I can then get them going, oh, I like that. I like this. I like this. They're always interested in something new because they're thinking something's going to be different than what they typically already have on the wall.
Right. Well, in that respect, would you say you're still evolving your style, like you haven't quite pinned it down yet?
I am always evolving my style. So when I started doing pen and ink work, my first set of oil paintings all look like my pen and ink work, very flat and stuff like that. I'm like, all right, how do I get to more professional level? So I studied with Karen and Jack Winslow, who used to study at the Student Art League with Frank Mason, and I learned about mass paint oil painting for them. They taught me how to do plein air, and it's like about creating the emotional feel. Like, oh, okay, great. Let me do this. And then I took some workshops with Staple and Cairns, who, I was doing painting outside, and he's like, you got to make it feel like nature. Oh, okay. So I did a tree, and so it's okay, that's better. Now make it feel even more like nature. So I get to a point, and I'm like, okay, I take something in, and I use it to adjust my work. And then when I was doing fantasy work, I'm like, you know what? It was kind of flat. It's not really what I liked. I was trying to mimic all the people I saw doing regular fantasy work, digital work and everything like that. And there was a guy, Mark Sheff, a friend of mine. He was like, I really like your landscape paintings. And not so much as your fantasy art. And I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Then it occurred to me going, wait, if I took my landscape style and applied that to my fantasy art, and people like Julie Bell and Boris Vallejo and stuff like the Illustration Masters class helped me meld my plein air emotional feeling with my fantasy art. I got to that point, I'm like, oh, this is the feeling I want. So I nailed the feeling down. Then I'm like, okay, then, some of the instructors were like, you know what? I'd like to see a little more detail. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'd like to see a little more detail too. So now I'm working more towards doing figurative work, adding a little more detail, but still having some, balance between the abstract, my figurative work, and all the other stuff. And once I get done with this, I'll spend like a couple of years trying to get the figurative work in there. Once I'm done with that, somebody will say, hey, I'll see something I like. And I'm like, okay, how can I incorporate that into the way I'm doing? So it is always constantly evolving. And the way I look at it, it's always, there's a certain problem that, like I said, I don't want it to be the same as all my other work. So there's always a certain problem I'm looking at, which is when I take workshops specifically to solve that particular problem. And then I will incorporate that solution into the way I do my work. So hopefully I end up with work that's more unique to me and like what I like to do.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Well, now specifically getting to your art, like kind of for the first time in your late 30s. I think a lot of people listening can relate to that. Maybe they've had like a long gap in their artistic career for whatever reason. Did you have any things that kind of try to hold you back, especially coming from it at such a later age?
Yeah, I was tired.
Yeah.
I was really tired. No, it ends up that yeah. So I drew a lot in my high school, college and stuff like that. I really did no artwork between 21 and probably 32. Yeah. I do the usual stuff, hang out with my friends, play tennis,
Mm-hmm.
play basketball, worked a lot. I was a freelance software consultant. And my early to mid 30s, I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I'm tired. And I just kind of want to do something for fun. I started doing this, just dabbling with it. But the biggest problem I ran into was that I literally would get home. Yes, I sit at a desk, but I write software and I write software for science corporations and government systems and stuff like that. It's mentally tiring by the time you get home.
Mm-hmm.
So I would get home, like 6 o'clock or so, and I'd be just tired. And it's like, okay, I get up naturally early. So I've got like 4 hours. And I'm like, you know what? I just going to sit here and watch TV or read a book or something like that. And that was the biggest problem I had, was I was just physically tired.
So what did you do? Because obviously you have progressed quite a bit as an artist. So you have pushed through that tiredness. How did you do it?
Well, there's a couple things I did. So one is what I do is they're called calculated risk. If you're going to improve, you've got to take risks. Nobody ever improves by just sitting there. You've got to take risks. Just like, you go and take, you'll draw your drawings. You show your drawings to people. Yeah, they may laugh at it, they may not, but who cares? You've got to take those risks. So some of the things I basically did was, the first thing I did was I signed up for an art fair. I had to do a show. I had an art fair. It cost me $1,200 to do the show. It was in March, and I had a gallery showing. I had 40 paintings. I'm like, great, I've got enough for everything. The gallery showing came by and they took all 40 paintings. And I'm like, okay. So they took all my paintings and I'm like, I have a $1,200 show coming up. I have no work for the show at all. And it's in 2.5 months. This is not good. Mm-hmm. So I did the paintings for the show and I sold a number of paintings at that show. But I constantly put myself into all these situations where I have to produce. So back in my mind, so it's a little stressful sometimes, because I sometimes overdo it. But I will pick up, clients for book covers and stuff like that, because they're counting on me to do it. These shows are counting. I paid money. It's not acceptable for me not to do it because I've already signed up for it. The other thing I did was, because I didn't want to be essentially I didn't want my wife to leave me. It's one of the things where, she's at work all day, I'm at work all day, I come home, I go upstairs. You do that for several years, your wife is not going to be happy. Their spouse is not going to be happy with you at all. So what I did was, I'm like, all right. So I asked her and we agreed. What I did is I set up an easel in the living room, and with a nice shelf, and I can paint there. So in the beginning, first couple times, it was kind of hard because for the first year or so, it was kind of hard because when I painted, I was concentrating so hard. She would ask me questions and I never heard her. So then she was saying, well, you're not listening to me. I'm like, you know what? You're right. Okay. How do I solve this? So what I did was I went outside plein air painting in front of a bunch of people, and I learned to talk while I painted. It helped me sell my work outside, but when I was in the house, I can now paint and talk to my wife at the same time. So now I'm and what this also having the painting on the easel does is I come home, like last night was a perfect case. I came home, I was sitting there, the dogs went out to agility training, stuff like that. I was sitting on the couch and I would love to have just watched TV. But I looked at a painting, I'm like, you know what? I've got to finish that painting. I've got a bunch of other paintings I got to do for my Kickstarter. It's like, I got to finish that painting. So I got up and I spent about 3 hours working on the painting. And so for me, it's those little reminders. I don't have to, you don't have to spend like 8 or 10 hours doing it. Those little reminders going, okay, you know what? For an hour and a half, 2 hours here every night, just do your artwork. And then doing that over a consistent period of time is how I was able to build a lot of work and get faster and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, well, I love that idea of having the easel right there next to you, or kind of living amongst your art. I know our previous guest, our mutual friend, Melissa Sue Stanley and Max Bear, they do this. They just kind of live amongst their work. I just think it's a great idea because it gives yourself that kind of constant reminder that, oh, there's stuff that needs to get done. So often that's like the hardest thing to do is just sit down and do it, or like having this whole like, all right, I have to get into artistic mode and go into this other room to like take on this new identity. If you're living amongst the work, it makes like the art part of your life and just something that you can, it's as simple as just standing up and doing it,
That's the thing. So, right. I'm usually can paint within 5 minutes of actually, all I have to do is physically get up, take my tubes, squeeze it onto my palette and start painting. And that's it. But if I had to go upstairs, go to my room, pull out all the stuff like that. There's it's that initial momentum that you really lose.
Yeah, for me, let's like go into the gym. It's like the idea of having to change my outfit, get in my car and go there is almost like the hardest part of it. If I could just like snap my fingers and be at the gym and just do the actual physical work, I think that is mentally more appealing to me. But it's that whole process of, getting your shoes on and getting out the door and like going out into the cold. That's the thing that usually holds me back.
And the thing, and I have the exact same problem by going to the gym, and I'm really awful about doing it because I used to like doing the gym. As I get older, I less and less like it. But I'm like, all right, let's solve this problem. Let me get my weights and put it in the room. So I've got free weights. I've got dumbbells I put in my room, and I got the nice room laid out. Yeah, I barely go into there. I'm like, you just have to walk across the hallway. Seriously, right? You can do it.
I hate that room.
And it's like, let's keep the dogs out. Let me just close the door. Maybe no, you got to keep that room there.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I also like the idea of like teaching yourself how to be able to multitask or talk while you paint. I wonder, has that changed your style at all? Like, are you able to kind of tap more into like a subconscious type of like a painting, or have you seen any differences?
Well, yes and no. So when I do my work, because it's a little more loose than the traditional fantasy stuff, there's this period of time where I can just throw paint. Literally, I am physically throwing paint, using paper towels, wiping, stuff like that. And no, I talk and stuff like that because it's a nice distraction. I'm not focused on anything. But there's also that time of period where I'm doing some detail work. But my wife will tell me to shut up if I keep talking like, 2 hours straight. No. So what I do is I pick the times when I talk. The times when I'm talking is when I'm doing something very loose and stuff like that. It's like when I'm painting outside. I will lay down a base painting. Like when I'm doing a plein air event, I will lay down a base painting. And I can usually do a painting about a little over an hour. But I spend about 2 to 3 hours outside because I will then walk away, for the first 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I'm usually focused. Then after that, it's more of just touching up here and there. I like the distraction because what it does is if you do your work and then you go and talk to somebody and look away and stuff like that, and you come back, you'll see something you didn't see before. So that's where that part does help me. So if I'm watching, she's watching TV, I'm doing the stuff, I'll do the painting, I'll lay down for say 15, 20 minutes, and then I'll go and talk to her for about, maybe 5 minutes, look at TV for like a couple minutes. 8 minutes later, I look back and go, oh, I didn't notice that. I'll keep doing it. And I'll literally do that for about 2 or 3 hours. So it's a nice distraction away from what I'm doing.
Right. To be able to take that short or long break to be able to come back to it with a different eye.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to jump back to the thing about deadlines too. It's one of the things that a lot of people advise is giving yourself those self-imposed deadlines, but you take it one step further and you actually like literally sign up for and create an official deadline for yourself by jumping into these other projects. Would you have advice for anybody listening that maybe has trouble then kind of setting deadlines for themselves?
So there's a couple ways I do this. You don't have to do these big expensive things. But what the deadline has to do is you have to do something you're accountable to somebody else. That's the thing. It could be free, but you could do something as simple as, you know what? I'm going to once a month. I've got 10 friends, and once a month they're going to expect. Or actually, friends is not. I would do it somebody who's not exactly a friend. And the reason why I would do something not a friend is because a friend will give you leeway.
Let you off the hook.
Yeah, you want to do something where, hey, library, I'm going to send you one painting every month that you can hang on your wall. You know, you don't know these people. They're counting on the fact that they're expecting that. Now you're accountable as somebody who's not going to let you off the hook, or something for an art director. So it's not like you have to spend money on a huge booth. You just have to do something for somebody that will hold you accountable. And like I said, friends will say, yeah, that's okay. A lot of other people won't. What it does is, and then the second part of that is, it's all about consistency. So I really, really hate the mentality of you have to work all the time. It's just, I hate that mentality, because all you're going to do is you're going to burn yourself out and you're not going to like what you're doing. So what I do is I will typically do 1 to 3 hours a night, almost every night, but some nights I take off, and then I work on the weekends, stuff like that. But I just do short periods over a consistent amount of time. It's kind of like going to the gym. You go to the gym, you can go there for like 4 or 5 hours, but you tend to get better gains if you go there for like half an hour every day on a consistent time over a period of time. So that's tend to what I do to, make sure I have a large body of work and make sure I have work delivered for people.
It's all about those gains.
It is. For me, it's all about the small little gains, and they all build up.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about one of your big gains, which is your Kickstarter, your book that you're creating based off of ShadowMyths. So maybe could you talk about, so maybe could you talk about like ShadowMyths and then how the book came to be? Okay, so at the Illustration Masters class where I learned from Julie Bell and all of them, there's I'm not sure if you know him, Ian McKay. Sure.
Ian McKay's, and he taught at the Illustration Masters class for a number of years. I learned a lot about storytelling from him, and I had this idea probably like 4 or 5 years ago that I can do a book. I'm like, you know what? I want to do an art book. This is great. All my paintings came together, and I really like this concept of the story. And I'm like, but I'm a huge philosophy fan. I like to think about moral issues and a bunch of other stuff. I like reading philosophy. So I thought in the beginning I was going to just do a philosophy book, but more and more Ian was talking about it and about stories. And I wrote down these are my paintings. This is what painting means to me. I have a book of that. And I read the first half of the book and I'm like, this is boring. I don't even want to read it. It's like, you know what? If I'm not going to want to read it, other people are definitely not going to want to read it. So I'm like, all right, we got to change things here. So I was trying to figure out, okay, I know I want to do a book. I want to do an art book, but I don't want to do the same thing everybody else does. And it's like, you know what? If you get an art book with pretty pictures, you're just going to look at it once, put it on a shelf, and you're done. I'm like, what can I do? Well, Ian told me about how to do, the story arcs and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, let me look. And then what I did is I laid out all my pictures. And I'm like, hey, there's a story here. So I laid down a number of my paintings. And this time I had about probably 40 paintings or so. And I laid them all down. I'm like, oh, this is a story. So a story started gelling in my head about it. So I'm like, all right. And then I started writing down that story for it. And that was about a year and a half ago. And my wife, and overall, I was looking at it and like, you know what? Other people can use the same idea for the story. So that's how I came up with the ShadowMyths decks, where you could sit there and lay the cards in random order, and it's like a story prompt. So, a number of schools are using it for their product, for their schools to help them kids learn story writing and stuff like that. So I started using my own ShadowMyths decks for it. And I came up with the story. And I wrote the story down, I gave it to my wife, and she's like, I'm like, okay. So this is the same one that says you should love monsters. I'm like, all right. So she reads a lot of books. I'm like, all right, what's doing your life? She's like, I don't like this part. I don't like this part. I don't like this part. I did a workshop with One Fantastic Week workshop with Sam Flegel and Pete Moorbacher and them. And Sean Murray is like, and I was telling Sean Murray about my story. He's like, he gave me a couple tips going, what if you did this, this, and this? I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. So I came home, I rewrote the story. And this is one of the cases where, for a year and a half, it was kind of, it's just kind of writing it off and on and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm never going to get this book written because I didn't have any commitments to it. But I had people at the shows asking me when the book was coming. So I'm like, all right, how do I solve my problem? Let me force myself into the situation. So I had people asking me about the show. I'm like, okay, I got to get that book done. But I'm still not quite saying, you know what? Fine. Doing a Kickstarter end of February, beginning of March. Hired a layout person. Started talking to a book cover person. And so in November, I rewrote the book. I spent all of November rewriting the whole book because I had to have the book done and ready to give it to the layout person in beginning of December so that I could give it and get an estimate for my book publisher to go ahead and figure out the size of the book to get the Kickstarter and all the other stuff. So I literally had this 4 months of plans laid out that I need to do the work so that I can have the book ready for Gen Con and Dragon Con at the beginning of the year. So I'm like, so I planned everything. And it's like, okay, that means this book physically has to be done by November 1st. And so I'm like, all right, I got my deadline. So by setting up all that other stuff, I forced myself to have that book totally done by then. So I got it all written, everything like that. And I'm, going through all the deadline stuff.
Well, congrats. And I can't wait to
Thank
see
you.
it. We'll have information for it for people to check it out at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/280. I wanted to talk about the idea of laying out all your work and finding a story within it. Did you find that then informed your later work as you got these ideas of where the story needed to go or where you wanted it to go? Did that kind of change the way that you created in a kind of more intentional way?
No, actually, it didn't. So, well, that's not true. Maybe it did. And the only reason why I say it did is because by the time I got done with all the paintings and I laid them out, and I wrote the first part of the book, and then my wife read it and says, okay, the first half I really like. This part, yeah, you finished this thing in like 2 pages. Yeah, that's way too short. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay. So I went back and I'm like, I don't know how to resolve a lot of situations. So I'm like, you idiot, you've got your deck. So I pulled out my deck again. I laid out more cards. And I'm like, oh, this is what happens for the last half of the book. So the next thing I know, I went from like 40 pages to 110 pages. And then I'm like, okay, now I've got gaps in it. And so there was parts of it where after I laid out the whole thing, there was probably like 3 images that had gaps in it. So, and I'm like, okay, I've got 3 images that have gaps in it. None of my paintings fit. So what do I need for the gap? And I had one gap where I had like a collapsed building. And it's like, all right, I don't know what to do here. So I need something with a collapsed building type idea feel. So, but instead of saying, okay, let me just do a collapsed building, what I just do is I throw random strokes down and I start seeing scenes. I'm like, well, this doesn't fit it exactly, but the feeling is there. That's what I want. So I like, okay, great. So I just kind of put that piece into that area.
Now, that's always been your style to just like throw up some random strokes and then fill in the story from there?
Yeah, I do. So what I do is, when you go and look at clouds, you can see lots of things in clouds. But here's the thing. What you see is really, it's called the visual library for most artists. What you see is only things you know. If you know people really well, most of the stuff you see in clouds are really going to be people. If you know dragons really well, you're going to see a lot of dragons in clouds. So what I try to do is I make sure I try to draw lots of different things: people, creatures, dragons, weapons, teapots, apples, whatever. Because what it does, buildings and landscapes, what it does is when I see clouds, I see stains on the floor at a show, you start getting all these different ideas. So I'm like, all right, that's an interesting idea. So I do the same thing. I do it digitally. So digitally, what I do is I start off with a black chalk brush, and I literally make a bunch of black marks, and then I go and make a bunch of white marks over it. And what happens is I start seeing these scenes out of it. Now, since I know how to draw, or at least I think I know how to draw, what I do is I will go ahead and build up those scenes. Going, that looks like a guy with really long arms and a jaw. Okay, great. So I'll draw that in there. And then once I get that in there and I get the color and everything like that, then I go to my reference photos going, okay, I need that arm to look more realistic. So I'll look up references for arms. I need references for faces to look better. So once I know what my idea is, then I go look at the reference images to get the anatomies correct, get the positions correct, as perspectives and stuff like that. All my paintings are exactly that way.
I was wondering, Dougie, did you have any resources before we get to the final push? Anything that has inspired you or continues to inspire you that maybe could inspire us as well?
Yeah, I talked to I talked about a number of friends of mine and people I know and stuff like that. My two favorite resources are one. It's called the Illustration Masters Class. Everybody just calls it the IMC, but if you look under Illustration Masters Class, like Rebecca Gay or something like that, it's a 1-week workshop. If you want to do fancy work, you were there with a lot of high level professionals all over the world. These people are really good. I literally went from my work was to like my entire painting style is because of everything I learned from them, from Boris Vallejo, Julie Bell, Rebecca Gay, Greg Manchester, stuff like that, Scott Fisher, Dan Santos. It's literally everywhere I'm at was because of them. That's one. The second one about it is I do well at conventions because of I listen to One Fantastic Week, which is a weekly web show with Sam Flegel and Pete Moorbacher. They had a One Fantastic workshop that I attended to. And since I was so used to the art fairs, what happened was I needed to know how people bought and thought differently at a Comic-Con versus an art fair. So I took their workshop and they helped me revamp my booth. Between their workshop and their weekly shows, I get lots of different ideas about how I can sell my work. And those are my two major sources of things I learned. And of course, I learned a lot of my drawing from Alan Williams, who is just an amazing artist. He has a Patreon that I use a lot.
Very cool. We'll link all those up at today's show notes page. Thanks, man.
Okay, I'll send you a link for all this.
Very cool. Thanks. Dougie, before we let you go, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Oh, okay. This is the one I tell everybody. It's kind of sound like a broken record. Essentially, the way I look at it is one of the days I'm going to be in the hospital. I'm going to be in the hospital. You're going to be in the hospital. One of us you're going to get sick. And when you're in that hospital, all those Facebook likes you get and all the other stuff you get where everybody's like fans on the internet, they're not going to visit you there. Your friends are going to visit you there. You're like your really close friends you physically see. Your spouse, your family's going to visit you there. So working all the time to get all those Facebook likes and stuff like that, that's great. It helps you improve and stuff like that. But for me, it's all about hanging out with my friends, hanging out with my family. So that's why I don't work all the time. That's why I do small little pushes constantly so that I still have time to hang out with my wife, my dogs. When I'm in agility trial doing a lot of work, I go and hang out. I watch them do the agility every so often, between my work. And I hang out and talk to them and stuff like that because for me, it's all about that personal relationship as opposed to, hey, I've got like 10,000 friends or, 100,000 Instagram likes.
Absolutely. Yeah. The friends and family, that's the most important thing. And also that's where you draw experience. That's where you do get that life experience so that you're not always seeing dragons in the clouds. You're seeing all kinds of other stuff and getting inspiration that way.
Agility taught me by looking at agility. I used to do a bunch of creature designs. When I first started doing creature designs, I used to take people's at the agility competition. I take their dogs and do live sketches of their dogs as monsters. People loved it.
That's awesome. Cool. Dougie, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for giving us that push and sharing your story, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, it really was, man. Thanks. And again, you can find Dougie on his website, which is ShadowMyths.com. And we'll have links at our show notes page today to find out more about the Kickstarter and everything else. And everywhere else you can find Dougie at yourcreativepush.com/Dougie or yourcreativepush.com/280. Dougie, thanks again.
Thanks a lot, man.
A big thank you once again to Dougie, one of my new favorite people. I had such a fun time talking with him, and he's such a great guy. But I really love what he has done with his art. He got into it later in life, but he wasn't afraid to do it. He hit the ground running, and I love what he does with repurposing his art, making his ShadowMyths deck for idea generation for you, but also now turning it into a book with his Kickstarter. So today in this week, I want you to think about how you can repurpose what you do. How can you present it to the world in a new way, and how can you perhaps give your old work new life? Like Dougie said, he destroys 90% of his art. Maybe don't go that crazy, but look back to your old stuff and see what you can do with it. See if it inspires you even to do something new. So definitely a resource-filled show notes page for you today. Everything that Dougie talked about, his own Kickstarter page, as well as Illustration Masters class, one fantastic week. And I'm also going to throw in another link to Tim Ferriss's podcast, because he had an interview with Terry Crews, who is the Old Spice guy, that was really inspiring, especially for artists, because Terry is an artist himself, and he just had so many great stories about being an artist and doubting yourself and how that doubt never leaves you. I'm going to try to get him on the show as well, but in the meantime, definitely check that out. We'll have it linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/280. But that is all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you next week if you need that push again. I love you all so very much. Go get to that work, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.